There is a moment that comes in every person's life when they realize that the blood running through someone else's veins does not guarantee loyalty. For me, that moment arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in February, sitting in a bank conference room in Cleveland, Ohio, staring at documents that proved my younger brother had been systematically destroying everything our father spent 40 years building. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you need to understand where we came from, what this business meant to our family, and how a bond I thought was unbreakable became the very weapon used to tear my entire life apart. My name is Daniel Mitchell, and I trusted my brother Marcus with everything, with our father's legacy, with my children's future, with the family name that 3 generations of Mitchells had built their reputation upon. And in return, he looked me in the eyes at every Sunday dinner, hugged my kids on their birthdays, and quietly, methodically, stole everything while I was too blind to see it. Mitchell and Sons Contracting was founded in 1982 by my father, Robert Mitchell, in a small garage in Lakewood, just outside Cleveland. He started with nothing but a pickup truck, a tool belt, and a reputation for honest work. By the time I was old enough to hold a hammer, the company had grown into one of the most respected commercial contracting firms in Northeast Ohio. We built strip malls, office buildings, apartment complexes. We employed over 200 people at our peak. Our name was painted on billboards, printed in local newspapers, spoken with respect at Chamber of Commerce meetings. I joined the company full-time right after high school. I never wanted anything else. I loved the smell of sawdust, the satisfaction of seeing a structure rise from bare ground, the pride in my father's eyes when clients shook his hand and thanked him for a job done right. Marcus took a different path. He was the smart one, the one everyone said would go places. He went to Ohio State, got a business degree, and spent his 20s bouncing between corporate jobs in Columbus and Chicago, climbing ladders and collecting credentials. I never resented him for it. I was proud of him, genuinely proud. He was my little brother, and I wanted him to succeed. When our mother passed away in 2014, something shifted in our father. The grief never fully left him. He still came to work every day, still walked job sites with his clipboard, but the fire had dimmed. 2 years later, he was diagnosed with heart disease. The doctor said he needed to slow down, reduce stress, consider retirement. That was when Marcus came home. I remember the day he drove up to the main office in a leased BMW, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He said he wanted to help, that he had been thinking about the family, about the future. He said he missed Cleveland, missed us. I believed every word, because I wanted to believe it. I wanted my brother back. I wanted us to be partners, to carry our father's legacy together, the way it was always meant to be. My father was hesitant at first. He knew Marcus had never spent real time on a job site, never dealt with suppliers or union negotiations, or the 1,000 small crises that happened every week in construction. But Marcus was persuasive, always had been. He talked about modernization, about digital systems and growth strategies, about taking Mitchell and Sons to the next level. Eventually, my father agreed to bring him on as the chief financial officer. I would remain as the chief operating officer, handling day-to-day operations, managing crews, and maintaining client relationships. Together, we would run the company, and when our father was ready to step back completely, we would own it as equal partners. For the first 2 years, everything seemed perfect. Marcus implemented new accounting software, streamlined our bidding process, and brought in several new commercial clients through connections he had made in Chicago. Revenue increased, profits increased. My father smiled more than he had in years. At Thanksgiving in 2018, he stood up at the dinner table with tears in his eyes and said he could finally rest easy, knowing his boys would carry on what he started. I squeezed Marcus's shoulder across the table, and he squeezed mine back. I thought we had made it. I thought we were finally the family we were always supposed to be. The first sign of trouble came so quietly that I almost missed it entirely. It was in the spring of 2019, during a routine meeting with one of our longest-standing clients, a developer named Howard Berman, who had worked with my father since the 90s. Howard was a straight shooter, the kind of man who said exactly what he meant, and he pulled me aside after the meeting with a strange look on his face. "Danny," he said, "I don't want to overstep here, but are you guys doing okay financially?" I laughed and told him we were doing better than ever. He nodded slowly, but his expression did not change. "It's just that the last two invoices were higher than the original bids, significantly higher, and when I called your office about it, your brother explained something about material cost adjustments and fuel surcharges. It made sense on paper, but it didn't feel right. You know I've never had that problem with your father." I assured Howard that I would look into it. That night, I mentioned it to Marcus casually over beers at my house. He laughed it off, said Howard was getting old and paranoid, that the adjustments were standard industry practice and completely documented. He pulled up the invoices on his laptop right there in my living room and walked me through every line item. It all checked out. I felt foolish for even asking. "Danny, I know numbers," Marcus said, closing the laptop with a confident smile. "That's literally why Dad brought me on board. You know the field, I know the books, that's how this works." I apologized for doubting him, and we spent the rest of the night talking about the future, about how we would expand into Columbus and maybe even Pittsburgh within 5 years. Marcus painted a beautiful picture, and I hung on every word. My wife Claire was quieter than usual that night. After Marcus left, she stood at the kitchen sink for a long time, staring out the window at his taillights disappearing down the street. "I don't like how that conversation went," she said without turning around. I asked her what she meant, and she shook her head. "He's your brother, Danny. I know you love him, but the way he shut that question down, it was too smooth, too rehearsed. Just promise me you'll keep your eyes open." I promised her I would, but the truth is, I did not. I went right back to trusting Marcus completely because that was easier, because questioning him meant questioning everything I believed about my family. And so the first warning slipped past me like a shadow in broad daylight. The second warning came 6 months later, and this time it was impossible to ignore. My father had a heart attack in October of 2019. It was not his first, but it was the worst. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital and another month in a rehabilitation facility. During that time, Marcus took over all his remaining responsibilities at the company. I was too busy running between job sites and the hospital to pay attention to the financial side. I trusted Marcus to hold the line, to keep things running smoothly until Dad recovered. When my father was finally well enough to come home, he called me into his study one evening with a troubled expression. He had been going through some of the company's recent filings just to catch up, and he found something he did not understand. "There's a subsidiary on the books," he said, tapping a printout with his finger. "Mitchell Development Holdings. I didn't authorize this. Did you?" I told him I had never heard of it. He handed me the papers, and I scanned through legal jargon that meant nothing to me. But the signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Marcus Mitchell, as authorized signatory for Mitchell and Sons Contracting. "Dad, I'm sure there's an explanation," I said, though my stomach was already tightening. "Let me talk to Marcus." "No," my father said firmly. "Let me. He needs to answer to me first." I do not know exactly what was said in that conversation, but I know it was heated. I could hear raised voices from the hallway, even though the study door was closed. When Marcus finally left the house that night, he did not look at me. He just got in his car and drove away without a word. My father sat in his armchair for a long time afterward, staring at the wall. "He says it's a tax optimization structure," my father finally said. "Shell company, to hold certain assets, defer some liabilities. He said the accountants recommended it." "And you believe him?" I asked. My father's jaw tightened. "I don't know what I believe anymore. But I believe in this family, Danny. I have to believe in this family. Just watch him. Watch him carefully." Those words would haunt me for years. My father believed in family so deeply that he chose denial over the truth. And because I loved him, because I wanted to protect his final years, I made the same choice. We both looked the other way, and the thief in our midst kept stealing. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep in March of 2020, just as the world was shutting down for the pandemic. We buried him in the family plot next to my mother, and I wept like a child at the graveside. Marcus stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his face a mask of grief. I leaned into him, grateful for his presence, never suspecting that beneath that mask was something cold and calculating. The will was straightforward. My father left the house to a family trust for both of us to share, left small bequests to longtime employees and his church, and left the company in equal shares to me and Marcus, 50% each, equal partners, just as we always planned. The lawyer explained that we would need to formalize a partnership agreement, decide on titles and responsibilities, and ensure the transition was smooth. Marcus nodded along, asking all the right questions, taking notes like the diligent businessman he pretended to be. In the weeks that followed, as we navigated the chaos of shutdowns and project delays, Marcus proposed what he called a practical arrangement. He suggested that I remain focused on operations and client relationships while he handled all financial, legal, and administrative matters. He pointed out that we were in crisis mode, that we needed specialization, that he had the expertise to guide us through the economic uncertainty. It made sense. It always made sense when Marcus explained it. "You're the heart of this company, Danny," he said. "You're the one the crews respect, the one the clients trust. Let me be the brain. We'll complement each other perfectly." I signed the partnership agreement without reading every line. I signed power of attorney documents so he could handle banking matters efficiently. I signed dozens of forms he put in front of me because I trusted him, because he was my brother, because my father had just died and I was too grief-stricken to think clearly. Each signature was a link in the chain Marcus was wrapping around my neck. For the first year after my father's death, I threw myself into the work. The pandemic slowed commercial construction, but we adapted. We pivoted to renovation projects, home additions, essential infrastructure. We kept most of our employees on payroll, took out PPP loans, and weathered the storm better than many of our competitors. Or so I thought. In truth, I was seeing only what Marcus wanted me to see. He controlled the bank accounts, the payroll systems, the vendor payments, the client billing. He gave me monthly reports that showed steady revenue, modest profits, healthy cash reserves. When I asked questions, he answered them with just enough detail to satisfy my curiosity without revealing anything meaningful. He was masterful at it. Years later, when I understood what he had been doing, I realized that lying to me had become as natural to him as breathing. The veil began to lift in early 2022, and it was my wife Claire who pulled the first thread. She had never fully trusted Marcus, not since that night in our kitchen years before. She kept her suspicions to herself for the most part, not wanting to cause a rift, but she never stopped watching. And when she noticed something unusual in our personal finances, she did not let it go. "Danny, we need to talk," she said one evening after the kids were in bed. She had her laptop open on the kitchen table, and her face was pale. I sat down across from her, immediately on edge. "What's wrong?" "Your quarterly distributions from the company. They've been declining for 8 months straight. Did you know that?" I frowned. "Marcus mentioned something about reinvestment. We're putting profits back into the business to fund expansion." "That's what he told you, but look at this." She turned the laptop to face me. "These are the deposits into our account from Mitchell & Sons over the past 2 years. This is what you were getting when your father was alive. And this is what you've been getting since Marcus took over the finances." The numbers were stark. My distributions had dropped by nearly 40% over 2 years. I felt my pulse quicken. "There has to be an explanation," I said, but my voice was uncertain. "Maybe there is." "But Danny, I've been doing some reading. About that subsidiary, the one your father asked about. Mitchell Development Holdings. I found some public filings. It owns property, a lot of property, office buildings, a strip mall in Medina, apartment complexes in Akron. Did you know about any of that?" I shook my head slowly, a cold weight settling in my chest. "Because according to these records, those properties were purchased with funds from Mitchell & Sons Contracting, our company, our father's company, but the ownership is in the subsidiary, and the subsidiary, she hesitated, then met my eyes. The subsidiary isn't owned equally by you and Marcus. It's owned 90% by Marcus and 10% by a holding company registered in Delaware. I couldn't find any information about who owns the Delaware company, but I think we both know. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table, my mind racing to catch up with what Claire was telling me. That's not possible, I said. The partnership agreement says we own everything equally. The will said. The will divided the shares of Mitchell and Sons contracting equally, Claire interrupted gently. But the subsidiary is a separate legal entity. If Marcus set it up correctly, he could have funneled assets out of the main company and into something he controls. The main company might be worth a fraction of what it was, while the real value sits somewhere you have no access to. I stared at her, and for the first time, the magnitude of what my brother might have done began to dawn on me. Not a small indiscretion, not a mistake, a calculated theft of my inheritance, my children's future, my father's life work. I need to see the books, I said, standing up abruptly. The real books, not the reports Marcus gives me. I need to see everything. I know, Claire said. But Danny, you need to be careful. If he's done what I think he's done, he's not going to let you find out easily. He's been covering his tracks for years. If you confront him now, before you have proof, he'll just deny everything and cover it up better. She was right, and I knew it. For the first time in my life, I had to think of my brother as an adversary. It felt like learning to walk again, every step uncertain, every instinct wrong. But I forced myself to nod, to sit back down, to listen to my wife's plan. We need a forensic accountant, Claire said. Someone outside the company, someone Marcus doesn't know. We need copies of every financial record we can get our hands on, and we need to get them without tipping him off. This isn't going to be quick, Danny. It might take months. Can you do that? Can you pretend everything is normal while we figure this out? I looked at her. This woman who had stood by me through everything, who had seen the danger when I was too blind to notice, and I made her a promise. I can do whatever I have to do, for Dad, for our kids, for us. The investigation began the next week. Claire reached out to a former colleague from her accounting days, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who specialized in fraud detection and corporate forensics. Patricia was discreet, meticulous, and expensive, but she was worth every penny. I paid her fees from a personal account Marcus had no access to, and I prayed he would not notice the missing funds. Getting documents was harder than I expected. Marcus had locked down the financial systems tightly, and my login credentials only gave me access to the curated reports he wanted me to see. But I still had physical access to the offices, and I still had relationships with longtime employees who had been loyal to my father for decades. The first ally I recruited was Margaret Chen, our office manager since 1998. Margaret had known me since I was a teenager sweeping floors after school. She had watched Marcus arrive in his expensive suit and expensive car with undisguised suspicion, and she had kept her opinions to herself, only out of respect for my father. When I approached her cautiously one afternoon, she barely let me finish explaining before she nodded. "I've been waiting for you to open your eyes," she said quietly. "Your brother has been running this company like it's his personal piggy bank. I don't have proof. He keeps the important files locked in his office. But I see things. Payments to vendors I've never heard of. Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Monthly checks to a property management company that doesn't seem to manage any of our properties." My heart was pounding. "Can you help me get documentation? I'll get you what I can. But Danny, be careful. Marcus isn't stupid. If he finds out what we're doing, there's no telling how he'll react." Over the following months, I lived a double life. To Marcus, I was the same trusting older brother I had always been. I attended meetings, signed documents, and made small talk about family and football. I swallowed my rage every time he smiled at me, every time he clapped me on the back and called me partner. At night, I pored over the papers Margaret smuggled out, meeting secretly with Patricia in her office, building a picture of betrayal that was far worse than I had imagined. The scope of Marcus's theft was staggering. Through Mitchell Development Holdings and a web of related entities, he had diverted over $7 million from the company over 5 years. He had inflated invoices to clients and pocketed the difference. He had created phantom vendors and paid them for services never rendered. He had used company funds to purchase real estate that he then transferred to his personal portfolio. He had taken out loans against company assets and funneled the proceeds into accounts only he controlled. But the most devastating discovery was about the PPP loans we received during the pandemic. Marcus had applied for and received nearly $2 million in forgivable federal loans intended to keep our employees on payroll. According to the paperwork he showed me at the time, those funds were used exactly as intended. But according to the bank records Patricia obtained through legal channels, more than half of that money was transferred to Mitchell Development Holdings within weeks of receipt. It was fraud, federal fraud, the kind of crime that could put someone in prison for years. When Patricia showed me the evidence, laid out in spreadsheets and highlighted documents, I felt physically ill. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and threw up. My brother, my baby brother, who I had taught to ride a bicycle, who I had defended against bullies in middle school, who I had welcomed back into the family with open arms. He was not just a thief. He was a criminal who had exploited a national crisis to steal money meant to protect the livelihoods of people who depended on us. "Danny, I know this is hard," Patricia said when I returned to her office, pale and shaking. "But you have a decision to make. What you've found here is enough to take to law enforcement. The FBI takes PPP fraud very seriously. If you file a report, there will be an investigation, possibly an arrest, certainly criminal charges. But it will also mean the end of your relationship with your brother, and it will almost certainly become public. The company's reputation could suffer. You might face scrutiny yourself, as a co-owner who signed documents.